So, hello. My name is Morgan Moore, and I work for Audubon Southwest, a regional office of the National Audubon Society. Audubon protects birds and the places they need today and tomorrow throughout the Americas using science, advocacy, education, and on-the-ground conservation. You should be able to see live automated captions right now on your screen. They can be enabled or disabled in your Zoom toolbar under the live transcript option. And you can also submit questions you have in the chat anytime during the presentation, and we will answer them at the end. Our speakers today are Judy Coleman of Audubon Southwest and Michael Dax of Defenders of Wildlife. Judy is our Director of Policy for Audubon in New Mexico. For the first 10 years of her career, she worked as the attorney for the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance, where she helped protect New Mexico's public lands by opposing damaging projects in sensitive areas, lobbying the state legislature, working with agencies to improve project proposals, nominating special places for federal administrative designations, and through litigation when absolutely necessary. Judy joined Audubon in December of 2019 to work on policy change at the state level for water, renewable energy, wildlife, and lands. She holds a Juris Doctorate from University of New Mexico, as well as a master's in environmental policy from the Vermont Law School. Michael Dax is the New Mexico representative for Defenders of Wildlife based in Santa Fe. Before moving to New Mexico, Michael worked in Grand Canyon and Yellowstone National Parks as a trail groomer and tour guide. Michael earned a master's degree in environmental history from the University of Montana, where he began work on his book, Grizzly West, which focuses on the attempt to reintroduce grizzly bears to the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana and Idaho. And Judy, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will let you take it away. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Morgan. We'll figure out if I can share my screen. Can you guys see that? Okay, yeah. If I do it as a slideshow, can you see it as the whole screen?
Perfect.
Yay, okay. Thanks, Morgan, and hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give everybody kind of the nuts and bolts of how our legislature works in New Mexico. I'm going to show you how to navigate the New Mexico State Legislature website, which can be a little bit daunting and confusing. And then we're going to talk about kind of how the election changed the makeup of our legislature. And then we're going to talk about some bills that we're working on during this session. This session started a week ago, so we're just getting started. It is a long session, so that we're going to be in for the next 60 days. So we're doing this advocacy webinar so that you guys can learn how to do this at the beginning and keep going for the next 2 months, hopefully. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michael when we're talking about bills that we're working on this session so that he can share a little bit about the ones that he is working on, and then we will take questions. So hopefully that works for everybody, and I will go ahead and get started if I can figure out how to do this. I think just push down. Okay, so I'm going to start with the basics of our legislature. We basically in New Mexico have a state level version of the federal system. So we have an executive branch and a legislative branch and a judicial branch. Our legislature is basically the Congress of our state. We have 2 chambers, and so in the House side, we have 70 members, and in the Senate side, we have 42 members. The current makeup of those chambers is that Democrats have a 45 to 25 majority in the House and a 27 to 15 majority in the Senate. That was a 1-seat change in each chamber based on the 2020 election. So the House, Democrats lost a seat in the House in the 2020 elections, and the Senate gained a seat in the 2020 election. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So in New Mexico, we do not have a full-time legislature by any means. Every other year, we meet for 30 days, and every other year we meet for 60 days. And so in odd years, it's a long session, and in even years, it's a short session. The short sessions are pretty much limited to our budget. So they're only allowed to hear bills that either have an appropriation in them or have something to do with the state's budget, or in certain circumstances, the governor can put special legislation that she's interested in on the agenda, but basically it's a more limited session in even years. So odd years, which are our 60-day sessions, are much more expansive. That's when we can do policy bills and kind of more substantive legislation that has to do with just kind of policy changes and not necessarily having to do with the budget. So that's where we see a lot more environmental legislation being introduced. They're also kind of better because things do tend to take a long time to get through our legislature. And so it's very hard to get a bill passed in 30 days. It's hard to get a bill passed in 60 days, but it's a lot easier than in 30 days. So this year is 2021, so we are in a long session, as I said. The first day of the session in all years is the third Tuesday in January. So we just started last Tuesday. So we're 8 days into this legislative session, and it goes until March 18th or 19th. I can't remember exactly how many days is 60 from the day we started, but something like that. The legislature has what's called standing committees and interim committees. So standing committees are committees of the legislature that meet during the regular legislative session. So those committees are meeting right now. Interim committees are meetings, they're kind of joint committees between the House and the Senate, and they meet throughout the year. They tend to go and meet around different parts of the state so that different communities can have access to them. They didn't do that this year, obviously, because of COVID, but in general, that can be a really good time to go get to know your legislator. That's when they hear reports from agencies and reports about different things going on in the state that might lead to legislation later. So a lot of our legislative advocacy actually starts in the interim. You can't just kind of go into the regular session and start there. So we tend to go to interim committees during the year, present at interim committees to the legislature about things that we want to see happen in the regular session. So that committee schedule, they start doing that at about May and go until about November, meeting once a month or so. And they're organized by topic. So there's one just for environmental issues. I do want to spend just a couple of moments talking about the 2020 election, because even though, as we talked about in the last slide, each chamber's makeup only changed by one seat, the actual makeup of the individuals changed quite a bit. So I think it's about a quarter of our legislature right now is new people as of this year. So there are just a lot of new legislators. So even though the party didn't change, the makeup still changed based on kind of philosophy and policy positions and personality. And one place where that's super obvious is in the leadership. And so the pictures that are up on this slide are the current leadership in the House and Senate. So in the upper left is Senator Peter Wirth from Santa Fe, who is the Senate Majority Leader. To his left, our right, is Senator George Munoz. He's from Gallup, and he is now the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, that's widely regarded as the most powerful committee in the state legislature. To his right is Representative Patty Lundstrom. She is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee. In the bottom left, we have Senator Mimi Stewart, who's now the president pro tem of the Senate. And next to her is Representative Brian Egoff, who is the Speaker of the House. And so I want to note these people because the makeup of the legislature changed in the sense that it got more progressive after the 2020 election. And so a lot of senators who tended to be conservative Democrats in the Senate lost their seats in the primary to more progressive Democrats. And that swung the whole Senate very left after November. And the result of that is that the committee leadership changed. And so Senator Mimi Stewart is now the president of the Senate. It was Senator Mary Kay Papin before. That person basically picks who's on different committees and who chairs different committees. And the reason that that's so important is because committee chairs are the people who set the agenda for the committees and decide which bills come up for a vote in their committees and can pretty much kill legislation in their committee if they want to. And so our committees in the legislature now are chaired by people with different political philosophies than the previous chairs. And I would say that they're much more progressive than our previous chairs were. And so I think that opens the door to different kinds of legislation these next couple of years than were open to us before. A lot of the environmental legislation that we had been working on for a long time sort of was stopped by the leadership, and I think now it probably won't be. So that is good news for us. I wrote on here that some of you are more powerful than others because who your legislator is makes a difference in terms of how you can advocate and who you can advocate. And so if your legislator is one of these people, these are the people who have a much louder voice in terms of what legislation gets heard and advanced. And so if one of these people is your legislator, you should consider yourself very lucky because you have like a megaphone where the rest of us just have a telephone. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more later too. I will note that usually the legislature is this big party where everybody goes up to Santa Fe for 2 months and hangs out and talks to legislators in the hallway. For those of you who don't know, New Mexico is doing a completely virtual session this session. And so members of the public are not allowed in the roundhouse at all. And we're not allowed to talk to anybody in person. The legislature itself is running its committee hearings virtually and only going in once in a while for floor sessions. And so that definitely impacts some of the other things we're going to talk about in this presentation about how to actually reach your legislator. So we don't have to dwell too much on Schoolhouse Rock, but it is my favorite government video of all time. And at the end of my presentation, there is a link to the YouTube video if anybody wants to go sing and dance to the song after this. But I did want to kind of go through how a bill becomes law just briefly, because it is a lot of work and a lot of steps. And lobbying and advocacy really occurs at every step of that process. And so we start, sometimes years before a legislative session that hears a bill. Michael and I, you'll hear later, have been working on a couple pieces of legislation for I think 10 years now. And every year we just get a little closer and things get a little farther along, but you kind of just have to keep at it for years and years and years. And so it's a long process to change law in New Mexico and everywhere. So there's lots of work in advance. Once you actually get to legislation that you feel comfortable with, you have to get a bill sponsor to introduce it into the legislature. It's then assigned to a lot of committees. So generally 2 committees in the House and then 2 committees in the Senate. And then it has to also pass both floors. So that means if you have a bill that starts in the House, it will go to 2 House committees, then it will have to pass the House floor where every member of the House votes on it. Then it goes to the Senate where it has to do the same thing of going to committees and then going to the Senate floor. And then after all of that happens, if it magically does, you then have to get it signed by the governor. And so at every single step in that process, you have to go and advocate to legislators who are either sitting on that committee or on the floor or at the governor's office. And so it's a lot of babysitting and a lot of time, but also worthwhile. So New Mexico is a little unique, and just to touch on that for a few minutes, we do have a citizen legislature here. That means that our legislature is unpaid. They are volunteers. It's very strange. We're the last legislature in the country that doesn't pay our legislators. We also pay every other elected official in New Mexico. So county commissioners and city councilors have a salary, but our state legislature doesn't. So that's interesting. It also means that they all have jobs unless they're retired, which plenty of them are. But a lot of them are doing full-time jobs while they are legislators. And so we have lots of people who are teachers and lawyers and real estate agents and farmers and everything you can think of. So that makes us a little unique. They also don't have staff except for during the actual legislative session. So they are responding to emails themselves and kind of keeping track of everything themselves. It does mean that this presents a really good opportunity for citizen advocacy because they don't have a ton of help and they're often seeing thousands of bills every session. And so it's a good opportunity to educate them because they need it and they need the help because they don't have other help. They are pretty completely accessible. This picture is people that I know who did give me permission to use this picture. lobbying on the Senate floor. And so during the legislative sessions, when we are not in the middle of a pandemic, you can actually just go onto the floor of the Senate and talk to your senator, which is pretty amazing. And I don't think that happens in a lot of other states either. But it's great. You can just go and talk to your representatives about the things that are important to you, and they stand there and talk to you and listen to you. So it's good. New Mexico also doesn't have a ton of environmental laws. We just kind of don't legislate a lot of that yet. And so there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled. We're going to talk about some of that later, but it is just kind of worth noting that we just haven't legislated a ton of environmental issues yet. If you do decide to try to lobby your legislator, I really believe that it's all about relationship building, talking to them, letting them know what you care about. I have found that most legislators, no matter what party they are, do want to hear from their constituents. You know, you're never going to agree with everybody about everything, but I have found that, like, the last 5 years, for example, I had a Republican House member and senator. I am not a Republican, but both of them were always very nice and listened to me and heard me out. And we formed a relationship over years. And in doing that and taking that effort to do that, I learned that, you know, there were a couple environmental issues that we did actually agree on. So Senator Schmiedes, for example, was my House rep for a few years. We definitely do not agree on plenty of things. But in building a relationship with him, I learned that he does like animals. And so for bills that I was working on that were animal related, I could go to him and often he would vote for those bills. And so there were, you know, there are ways to find common ground with people that you wouldn't think you could find common ground with. And I would encourage everybody to do that no matter who their representative is. So I am going to pause for a second and take people through the legislative website, if I can figure out how to do this. Give me a second.
Judy, while you're figuring out that technical aspect of it, if I could just emphasize that one of the points you made earlier about with a citizen legislature that doesn't have staff, or during the legislative session, they only have one staff member typically. And a lot of times that person is helping with logistical issues. Sometimes those people, you know, can dig into substantive issues, sometimes not. And that really is a benefit where you're not just an advocate, but you're a resource. And so in building that relationship with your legislator, if you, becoming a reliable source of information is really key, where they lean on citizens that they trust more than any other state, which, you know, sometimes is just like totally crazy the way that you are as an individual able to influence policy, but it's also really cool and it's really advantageous to you as a citizen. And then just one other point on that quickly is, you know, especially this year when everything is so crazy, when you are talking to your legislator, make things as easy for them as possible to understand. You know, a big long email with big long paragraphs where, you know, a lot of the, you know, the information might be buried, might not be the best way to communicate the points that you are trying to get across. So being able to communicate efficiently and effectively, and, you know, when you're sending emails, you know, highlighting the lines, the facts that are really important, I think is really useful to make sure that, you know, when they're, you know, they have, you know, very full inboxes, especially this year where everything's happening virtually, you know, making sure you're communicating efficiently and effectively.
I think that's all very good advice and accurate. Thanks. Morgan, I don't know if something's weird. It says my screen sharing is paused. Can you guys see the legislature website? You can?
No,
Okay.
I would suggest you stop screen sharing and then reshare.
And then restart it? Okay. Sorry, everybody. Hold on a second. How now?
Perfect. There you
Yay. Go. Okay. So the reason I'm pausing for a second to do this is because it's not that easy to get through the New Mexico State Legislature website. And I just wanted people to have some idea about where things are if you're looking for them. I'm always happy to help people do this if people have questions about it. But I just thought it'd be good to kind of run through it for a couple of moments. So this is our homepage. It's nmlegis.gov. I will have the links at the end of the presentation, and I'm sure we can email them out too. On the homepage is kind of bigger announcements. So you'll see it says the Senate will reconvene on Monday, February 1st at 11 a.m. That's the next time that the Senate will be on the floor. It says the same thing for the House, but it's tomorrow. They're going back to the floor. So this is kind of where you see major announcements about what's happening. But I just want to note that up here under legislators, there's a little tab called Find My Legislator. And if you click it, you can actually search by your address for your House member or your Senate member. And that's how you find who to contact if you want to contact your own. So my legislator, for example, I'll just take you to her, is a new legislator. Where is she? She's right here behind my little thing. So my new legislator, just for example, is Meredith Dixon. So when you go and you put in your address and you find who your legislator is, it'll take you to a page like this with your person. And you can see here that it has her email address, her home phone number, her Capitol phone number. So this is where you'll find contact information for your own legislator. So that's the first thing that people should know. Over here in legislation, this can be a little bit complicated, but you can use all these different tabs to find legislation that you might be interested in or looking for. So just as an example, during the session, I often use this date of introduction button. So you can go and see like all the bills that were introduced on the 22nd of January, which is a bad example because apparently there were none, but you get the idea. You can fiddle around with it that way. You can also find legislation by sponsor. So if you want to know like which bills, you know, Carrie Hamblin has introduced this session, you can search by her name and you will get, if she had sponsored any legislation that was filed, it would be listed here with a link to that bill. So that's, you know, it's an easier tab to use if you sort of know what you're looking for, but you can also fiddle around with it if you want to know like what your legislator has sponsored. This is an important tab. It's the committee tabs. So if you hear that a bill is going to be heard in the Senate Conservation Committee tomorrow, you can click on the Senate Conservation Standing Committee and you'll see this is their agenda for tomorrow. It's impossible that they're going to get through all this, but this is what they have on the agenda. And you'll also see the members on Senate Conservation Committee down here. So you can click any of them and get to their contact information. So you can pretty easily figure out how to email the committee if you wanted to do that. Over here, you have the interim committees. These are the committees that meet during the year. These are the committees on the left that meet during the session. So you'll see it says interim committees over here, and these are regular committees for this session. So the other tab that's helpful is what's happening. This is where you have like this week's calendar for everything that they're doing at the Roundhouse. So you can see that like you can click on the Senate Rules Committee calendar here. Now the way that they're doing everything virtually, you have to figure out, it's a little more complicated, but there are Zoom links for each committee hearing. And so like if on Thursday you wanted to join House Agriculture and Natural Resources, you'd have to go to the committee schedule and click this link, but you'd be able to watch it in real time. You'd be able to raise your hand through the Zoom function and offer a public comment during a public comment period. So they are running the committee hearings the same way that they usually do and allowing people to speak on each bill. Over here is the webcast button. This is where you can see past and current recordings of committees and House and floor sessions. So you can watch everything that is happening in the legislature, either while it's happening or after it's over. So just kind of wanted to let people know approximately where things are. I know it's complicated and not super easy to navigate, but again, if anyone ever has problems with it, I'm happy to help. And once you sort of fiddle around with it a little bit, it gets more accessible and you sort of get used to realizing where things are. So I'm gonna, I guess, stop sharing and go back to my presentation since that seems to be the way to do this. So
And Judy, if I could again just jump in real
yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
So, they post the schedules, but the schedules can change.
Yes.
And so if there's a bill that you want to hear that's scheduled for that day, even if it's fourth on the agenda, I would recommend jumping on when the committee starts. And, the benefit this year is that you wouldn't be stuck in a committee room. You could, have your Zoom on and you could go do, other things that you want to be doing. But
You
because
can
they
wear pajamas.
yeah. But because they shuffle bills around, it can definitely happen that, what one bill sponsor is in presenting a different bill in another committee, so your bill gets moved up, and it would just be a bummer to miss the bill that you really want to hear because originally on the schedule it was somewhere else. So that's just kind of one of those annoying things, but I guess this year it's slightly more user-friendly than it would be normally.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it happened yesterday. Yesterday was the first time that we had bills in a committee and the whole agenda got juggled like an hour before the committee. So everything was heard in a different order. And unfortunately, that's not unusual. But they do generally announce what the order will be kind of as they go. So hopefully that's going to be navigable too, but it is annoying. So if you care about a bill, the best thing to do is read it if you can, understand what your position is, and contact your own legislator, especially if your legislator is on a committee that's hearing the bill that you're concerned about. You can go through the Legis website to see when it's in committee and virtually show up and comment on it. You can also reach out to organizations who are watching the bill and working on the bill because they often have fact sheets available and they can put you on email alerts about when something is going to be in a committee. We just did that yesterday. Some of the people on this webinar might have gotten it, but we were able to send an alert to our membership that is in certain legislators' districts to tell them that their legislator sits on a committee that's hearing a bill that we are concerned about tomorrow. And so that's a way that we can send targeted emails to you if your legislator is going to hear a bill that Audubon is working on or whatever. And we often include links to that legislator's contact page in case you want to email them or call them. So there are other ways to advocate besides in person at the Roundhouse, which we all need to get really good at this year because there is no in person at the Roundhouse. So phone calls are probably the best way to do it. The legislators do have a staff member during the session. Those people are answering their office phones at the Capitol. So you can still leave a message for your legislator at their office phone and hopefully they will get it. Like I said, we do send out targeted action alerts if you want to sign up for those. There's social media where we often post about bills that we're concerned about and when they're going to be in committees, so you can watch things like that. You can post things on your own social media and encourage people to reach out to their legislators. And then, helping organizations that are doing the work is always helpful too. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk just briefly about 5 bills that we're working on and, advocating for this legislative session. I'm going to turn it over to Michael for SB 103 in a minute, but I'll talk about HB 51 first. So this is the Environmental Database Act. So this is the bill that was heard in committee yesterday, or one of the bills that was heard in committee yesterday. It was in the House Energy and Natural Resources Committee and passed. So its next committee is going to be the House State Government, Indian Affairs, and Elections. I don't remember how that whole acronym is going these days. They changed the title of that committee, but it's going to House State Government next, I hope next week. So we'll send out an alert about that when it happens. But this is basically a really simple bill. Right now, if you want to know kind of what's going on in a certain area of New Mexico, you have to dig through like a million different agency websites to try to piece it together because different agencies house different data. And so the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department has the data about oil and gas wells, and the Game and Fish Department has the data on threatened and endangered species critical habitat, and the State Land Office has the data on where utility scale renewable projects are. And so you have a bunch of different agency websites keeping track of different data, but for people like us and for the agencies themselves, like if they're looking at doing something in a specific area, it would be nice to have like a centralized comprehensive picture of everything that's going on in that spot. And so that's all this bill does, is it creates a centralized map-based database that houses all of the state's basic environmental data. We also included some public health data on there so that we could see kind of where public health impacts are correlating with other uses on state land. So all it does is set up a database. It would be housed by UNM, who runs a similar database for game and fish data currently. They would set up the database, collect the data from other agencies, and make it publicly available to everyone. It's a really cool technology. Other states use it. It actually lets you draw a little polygon on the map if you want to and get a report back to you about all the things that are happening inside your little shape that you drew on the map. So it'd be a really helpful way to kind of understand the comprehensive impact of our planning decisions and increase government transparency so we all kind of know what's going on where. So like I said, that one's going to be in its second committee, hopefully next week. And the sponsors for that are Representative Gail Chasey, Representative Georgine Lewis, and Senator Mimi Stewart, which is helpful because she is now President Pro Tem of the Senate. So hopefully that will help us move along. So maybe Michael, do you want to talk about pesticides, and then I'll do a brief overview of the other three? You're muted.
Yep, sounds good, Judy, thanks. So SB 103 would restrict use of neonicotinoids. So neonicotinoids are a class of pesticides that are the most widely used class of pesticides in the world. And there is lots of ongoing research about the negative impacts that they have to pollinators and other insects, but especially bees. So for the past 6 years or so, Senator Stewart has sponsored a number of memorials drawing increasing attention to the importance of pollinators. There's now a pollinator license plate that you can purchase, and DOT is planting pollinator-friendly plants along roadways and in the median strips and not mowing as much. And so this was the next logical step that Senator Stewart wanted to take. It is not an outright ban, unfortunately, but it would restrict a lot of uses. So one of the main uses it would restrict is for residential lawn and garden care. So right now, if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and purchase an insecticide, chances are it has a neonicotinoid in it. So that would be banned. For commercial agriculture, it would restrict use to only, it would only allow it on crops not directly pollinated by pollinators. So things that are wind pollinated, like corn and pecans, neonicotinoids would still be allowed, but it would require applicators to be licensed through the Department of Agriculture and receive continuing education about mitigating the impacts to pollinators. So it would be a first step, but it would be a meaningful first step towards really rolling back use of neonicotinoids and also having a much better idea of where neonicotinoids are being used. And let me just say quickly, when you are communicating with legislators about any bill, use the bill number as opposed to the name of the bill. That is what they look for much more so than the name.
And I'll just note too that Audubon, I haven't delved into it as extensively as I should, but Audubon has done some research on the impact to birds from neonicotinoids. I can't say that word well, gotta practice. So it is harmful to birds in addition to insect pollinators. So
it also
go ahead.
Yeah, and it also gets into water. It can affect fish and soil as well, and they persist for a long time after being applied. So I believe my contact information might be available in some capacity, but if you want to delve deeper into the science, I am happy to provide some research that would allow you to do that.
And we do have a fact sheet on both of these bills, actually, that we have sent around. I'll see if we can get them just posted on the website too, for people who just want some quick talking points about them. SB 103 was scheduled for Senate conservation tomorrow. It looks like that's going to happen Tuesday instead. Is that right, Michael?
That's
so
correct.
We have a few more days. It will be held in the Senate Conservation Committee as its first committee. So those committee members who are on that committee are the most important legislators right now to reach out to about this, but certainly you could talk to any of your senators about it because it's starting on the Senate side, so it's going to have to get all the way through the Senate before it moves over to the House. So every senator at some point will have to vote on it, but at the moment, Senate conservation is where it is. So just briefly on the other few, HB 57 is a prescribed burning bill. That also was heard and passed unanimously out of the House Energy and Natural Resources Committee yesterday. And that goes to House Judiciary next. It'll also be part of an alert I'm sure we'll send out once it gets scheduled in its second committee. This is a bill that would just allow for expanded use of prescribed burns on private land and set up a certification program for people to use it, and being certified would reduce their liability for damages if something goes wrong. So it was sort of it was in response to a report that was created over the last couple of years based on a memorial about the need for increased use of prescribed burns on private land. So we are supportive of that bill. The other two, you'll notice, don't have bill numbers yet. They just say HBXX and SBXX, and that is because they haven't been introduced yet, but we're expecting them to be introduced very soon. So HBXX is a climate solutions bill that's going to be introduced into the House by Representative Melanie Stansbury. I was expecting it yesterday, but maybe it'll be today, but any day now it will be introduced. This is a bill that kind of builds on the Energy Transition Act from a couple of years ago that required New Mexico to be carbon neutral by 2045. So this climate solutions bill that we're expecting any moment builds on that by sort of addressing how we get there. And so it creates a task force of different state agencies and directs them to get to carbon neutral by doing things like updating building standards and codes, updating efficiency codes, doing a bunch of rulemakings to kind of, it's a big bill that does a lot of things like that, but the idea is to build on the ETA to give some direction to agencies about how to actually get to carbon neutral. So we will support that bill whenever it comes. And when it has a bill number, I will share that with people. Similarly, SBXX will be a Senate bill introduced by Senator Jeff Steinborn and Representative Nathan Small. It'll be sort of a multi-pronged bill to sort of modernize the Game and Fish Department. So it restructures some things in the department. It changes the name of the department to the Wildlife Conservation Department. It gives the department authority over more species than it currently has. It increases funding to what we call non-game species, so things that are not deer and elk. It also fixes some issues that the sportsman community has had for a long time about how elk and deer tags are allocated. So it does a lot of things at once. It's going to be a large bill because it contains a name change for the department. So it goes through the entire regulation that applies to them, which is like 300 pages or something, but most of that is just changing the name. So we'll flesh out where the substantive parts of that are in the bill, so people don't have to read a 300-page bill, and we'll update people about that once it's filed too. I think that one's probably a little bit later than the climate solutions bill, but maybe it'll be introduced by early next week is what I'm hearing. So those are our big priorities. We do have some other bills that we're sort of watching. You might see them pop up in our newsletters, but those are the ones that we're really working on this session. Oh, do you have anything to add, Michael, about those 5? Okay. So just in wrapping up, this is my email address. This is the link to finding your legislator. Some other helpful links, the Schoolhouse Rock video, of course, which is important. There are some ways on the right to get involved. I'm sure that Morgan is posting links, or we'll send something out, or we'll send out this presentation or something so that people can have these available. And I think we can just answer questions if there are some. And Morgan, should I just turn it back over to you to do that?
Yeah, we can stay on this page just in case people want to write the link to the Schoolhouse Rock video now. We do have one question that came in earlier from Anne on the HB 51 database bill. She was asking to clarify if that includes federal activity as well, or just New Mexico's.
No, it's just directed at New Mexico state agencies. So because we're the state legislature, they can't direct the federal government to do anything. So it can't collect data from federal agencies, but it probably will have some federal data on it just sort of by default, because there are things that Game and Fish, for example, manages, like, you know, T&E critical habitat is going to be not based on land jurisdiction lines. That'll be something that's kind of more a larger data layer that encompasses a larger area. So there will be some information that covers federal land like that, but it doesn't require anything from federal agencies. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. I do have a question for both of you too. What do you see as the biggest challenge to advance your priorities this year in the legislature?
I mean, to me, the biggest challenges at the moment seem more based on time and the virtual weirdness that is this session, and the lack of extra money, more than political obstacles. I mean, politically, I think our legislature is in a really good place to do a lot of good things. It's just that we spent all our extra money on COVID relief, which was appropriate and necessary, but it does mean that we don't have extra money to do things conservation wise. So we all sort of have been having to figure out how to make our policy priorities very cheap or free this year, which is sometimes difficult. And then, you know, just not being there in person creates some hardships. We don't get to advocate the way that we usually do. And so we're all sort of having to figure out how to lobby effectively from our computers, which is just different than the way we're all used to doing it. And, you know, some legislators are better than others at being accessible by email and phone. And so I think that's just kind of a weirdness we're all navigating. And then time is always an issue because our sessions are so short. I think it's hard to do anything in 60 days. And that's going to continue to be an issue. So.
Yeah, the only thing I have all those same concerns that, you know, everything that I've learned over the last couple of years as far as how to advocate at the legislature is, you know, out the window to one degree or another. But especially with all the new members who I haven't had an opportunity to develop relationships with, trying to do that virtually is certainly going to be a hurdle. So I would say, especially if you have, if your legislator is new, then that's a really good opportunity, because I think that, you know, because they're new and they're learning along with you, that probably just elevates your voice even more.
Thank you both. And last call for questions. And I'm not seeing any more pop up, so I think we can go ahead and call it early. Thank you both so much for presenting, and thank you everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it.
And sorry, just before we sign off here, Joan Dickerson made a comment in the chat. If you want to sign up to speak for a bill in the Senate, you have to sign up via if you go to the What's Happening tab, and then go to the committee schedule for that day and scroll down to the appropriate committee. There will be an email address there. And as for what they seem to be doing right now is that you have to send an email before 3 p.m. the day prior to that committee hearing. Say your name, email address, for or against the bill, and then the Zoom master for each of those committees will send you the Zoom link prior. If you don't want to comment, you can just go to the webcast link. So if you're just watching and you just want to hear what's going on, the webcast is fine, and you can sign in the day up. If you actually want to make a comment, the House seems to be a little bit looser, at least for the moment. The Senate, you have to sign up the day before. Again, it seems entirely possible that some of that can change as we go through the session, because it's also new and they're definitely ironing out the kinks as they go. So we all have to be a little bit more on our toes this session than normal.
And yeah, that's a really good point. And I should have mentioned that too. And we'll try to note that when we send out alerts, whether it's a Senate committee that you have to sign up for in advance or a House committee where you can just raise your hand. I wish that was centralized or standardized, but they seem to have not gotten quite there yet. So we'll try to put that in our alerts.
And yes, I think both Judy and Michael would be happy to follow up with anyone who has more questions, and we will share the link to the recording for this as soon as we wrap up. So thank you guys and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.